You've probably heard at least 3 different narratives around AI this week. One that says AI is going to take your job, one that says it is the future, it's going to solve all our needs, and one that says it's completely overhyped. Now, all of these narratives are very compelling, but they also create a lot of confusion. And so you might be in a space right now where you are really worried about the future and unsure about what to do in the present. Now, in this video, I want to help you clarify your approach and to figure out what that next step is going to look like so you can be less worried and more optimistic and more prepared. Throughout our lives, one of the biggest challenges we face is that we have to close what is known as the intention-action gap, meaning we have to close the gap between the things that we want to do and what we actually end up doing. Now, there are many things that might get in the way of us closing that gap, but one very specific enemy of closing that gap is a lack of clarity. We are currently in an environment where information is moving really quickly, and our certainty about that information is very low. And so as a result, our brains are trying to figure out what the best course of action is. We are trying to make sense of this world. And one of the best ways that we make sense of the world is through stories. Stories help us to digest information. It also helps us to think, how do we make decisions and how do we act in a certain space that we find ourselves in? But this becomes quite challenging when we don't really have our own story formulated yet, and we have to rely on the stories that we are being fed. And the stories that you are being fed are so vastly different in nature. Some of these stories create fear. Some of them create maybe a bit of optimism, hopefully. Some of them create anxiety. But what they all have in common is they make you feel a certain way, but they don't give you clarity on how to make decisions and how to act in the moment. After many, many years of coaching executives and standing on stages, speaking about change, what I've come to realize is that we believe certainty comes from thinking more about the challenges that we are facing, when really clarity comes from acting more. We don't think our way into it, we act our way into it. And so one of the best ways to alleviate the worries that you have about the future is to stop thinking about how you should think about AI and to rather just start doing something with it. So look at this. Ichomzu is a news organization in Norway. They are real journalists doing real work. And they face the exact same challenges that many of us are facing today. They have these narratives about AI taking their jobs, and some saying AI is overhyped, and some saying that AI is going to really help the profession. But they could have debated this as much as they wanted to. What they ended up doing was, instead of debating, they started just experimenting with the tools. And the tool they started using was a tool called Jin by IBM. It's a system that was built to scan municipal documents and to find newsworthy stories and patterns within those stories. Now, they didn't just use the tool, they were training it on their own insights, on their own experiences, so it knew what to look for. And the results were incredible. Something that would usually take them 2 to 3 hours of research was now taking them 10 minutes, which meant that they didn't have to spend all their time on figuring out what to cover, but they could think about how to cover it, like what was the biggest story behind it. More than that, the newspaper actually increased the number of subscriptions because they presumably had a much better output. And also, they were finding stories that they previously missed. What the Ichomzu team did is they stopped theorizing and they started practicing. The narratives about AI didn't change, but their relationship with the tool did. And they aren't the only ones who have seen the power of going from theory to practice, from thinking about it to just doing it. Another example that caught my attention was from 2 teachers in New York. Teachers go through the exact same challenging narratives that we just had with a journalist. They also have the fear of AI taking their jobs and the hype of what it might do over time. And then the teachers who think that it might help them, progress in some shape or form. But ultimately, these 2 went from debating and wondering and conceptualizing to doing. And so what did they do? They realized that they need to build lesson plans and that this is a very time-intensive procedure. And instead of doing it by themselves, they could utilize AI to help them with this process. What they found once they started leveraging AI for lesson plans was that they were saving up to 8 to 10 hours per week. Now imagine that over the course of a month, a quarter, a year, that's an intense time saving. But more than that, they were able to build these plans to curriculum standards. They were able to scaffold it for learners at different levels, and they were even able to translate it should that be needed. What they realized when they jumped in and started using the tools is that AI is great at handling the mechanical work, the research, the planning, so that they could focus on the human work of nurturing young learners. And the pattern that you see is that when you start taking action, the narratives start fading into the background. Here are 3 mental models that are really useful for helping you to close the intention-action gap and that you can really start using today. The first mental model is called explore, exploit, and it says that we are always operating one of 2 modes. We are either exploiting what is currently working, or we are exploring what could be, exploring the future. And we need to be good at both, because exploiting is really about knowing what is working today. We don't want to throw everything away. We still want to focus on the things that we have cultivated over time and that we have found a certain rhythm with, the things that are producing results today. So that's still important. But at the same time, we need to have the space to explore new things, new paths, new products, new projects, new technologies. So a very practical step that you can take is to audit your time and to ask yourself whether you are actually spending enough time in both of those spaces. What you'll often find is that you prioritize one more than the other, and that's a big mistake. If you're only focused on exploiting, meaning focused on what is working today, then you aren't preparing for the future. But if you're only exploring and only trying out new things, then you also don't have any foundation from which you can build. You are neglecting the cash flow and the lifeline that you need today. It's often a very good idea to dedicate a specific amount of time to exploration, to have one meeting a week that is focused on us just trying out new things or bringing new ideas to the table or exploring new technologies. The second mental model is really to think of trying out new technologies as immersion therapy. The longer you wait to try out AI tools, the larger the resistance inside of you is going to grow. And that is because of 2 reasons. One is that the tools are becoming more complex. I use Claude all the time, and when Claude just launched, it was just a chatbot feature, essentially. But today, Claude has Claude skills, MCPs, artifacts. It has become a much more complex and robust tool. And so I could understand that for someone to get into it today feels a bit more intimidating. So the earlier you start immersing yourself in it, the more you can grow with the tools and with the ecosystem. But the second bit of resistance comes from the fact that the people around you are using these tools. They are becoming more proficient. And so if at some point you then decide to start, you might feel too much like a newbie or an amateur or a beginner. And of course, we don't like to seem foolish around other people. And so therefore, you might not try because you don't want people to look at you and go, well, they don't know what they're doing. What I want you to remember is that resistance compounds over time. And the antidote to that is to immerse yourself in this new world, in this new technology, as quickly as possible. Which really brings me to the third mental model, and the most simple and maybe the one that encompasses everything that I've just spoken about, which is just start. The only way that you get to figure out how to really use these tools is just to start with it. And initially, your interaction with it will be extremely simple, and that's perfectly fine. You are just learning how to use it. But what happens over time is that now that you become more proficient, you start seeing different applications and you become more creative. And don't just use ChatGPT. Try everything. Try Claude and Grok and Superseed and Nano Banana and Kling. Just try all of the different tools so you can just feel what it feels like. So you can just be exposed to all of these incredible new technologies. One of the great things about AI is that you don't have to fail in public. You can download it on your phone, you can play with it on your PC, and you become slowly more proficient in private until you are ready to show the world publicly how competent you've become. If there's only one thing you take away from this video, it is that the more time you spend listening to all the different narratives about AI, the longer you will wait to take action, because the more confused and the more paralyzed you'll be. And the antidote to that is always going to be that the more action you take, the more clarity you will gain and the more confidence you will have about how you show up in the future.